There are killers who act in the heat of the moment, killers driven by rage, jealousy, greed, or impulse. And then there are the ones who plan, the ones who spend years building their nightmares. In the remote deserts of New Mexico stood an unassuming mobile home. To passing strangers, it looked ordinary, but according to investigators and surviving victims, hidden nearby was a place of unimaginable horror. A soundproof trailer equipped with restraints, torture devices, and detailed recordings describing exactly how captives were abused. Its owner was a man named David Parker Ray. Known today as the Toy Box Killer, Ray is suspected of kidnapping, torturing, and sexually assaulting numerous women over several decades. Yet, despite the horrifying allegations and evidence uncovered by investigators, he was never convicted of murder, and the true number of his victims may never be known. This is the story of one of the most disturbing criminal cases in American history, a case filled with missing women, shocking survivor testimony, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. Welcome back to Meals to Unalive For, the podcast where true crime, dark history, conspiracy, and food collide. I'm your host, Jody Breton, and every week we serve up the stories that are as disturbing as they are fascinating, paired with a meal inspired by the chaos. So grab a plate, lock your doors, and let's dig in. Today we'll be making green chili corn fritters with lime crema, smoked brisket, jalapeno cornbread, and blueberry dark chocolate bread pudding. To understand David Parker Ray, many people point to a childhood marked by instability, abuse, and isolation. Born to Cecil Leland Ray and Nettie Opal Parker, November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico, David's early years were far from normal. When he was around 10 years old, his parents separated, and he and his younger cousin were sent to live with their grandparents on a ranch in rural New Mexico. According to multiple accounts, Ray's father was a violent alcoholic who physically abused him and exposed him to sadomasochistic pornography at a young age, experiences that many believed played a role in shaping the disturbing fantasies that would later define his crimes. Some sources and later retellings have claimed that Ray may have been sexually abused by a female relative during childhood. However, I was unable to find documentation from investigators or court records that confirmed that allegation. As a teenager at Mountaineer High School, Ray struggled academically and socially. He was described as painfully shy around girls and was reportedly bullied by his classmates. Isolated from his peers and dealing with emotional trauma at home, he turned to alcohol and drugs during his teenage years. By the age of 14, those troubling behaviors appeared to be escalating. Ray's sister later discovered a collection of bondage-themed drawings and pornography among his belongings. The discovery deeply disturbed her and reportedly caused a rift between the siblings that would never fully heal. Years later, Ray would claim that his violent impulses began much earlier than anyone realized. He allegedly confessed to committing his first abduction and murder around 1957 when he was just 18 years old. However, investigators were never able to conclusively verify that claim, leaving questions about how many victims may have crossed his path before he was ever identified by law enforcement. After high school, Ray joined the United States Army, where he worked as a mechanic, before receiving an honorable discharge. When he returned to civilian life, he built what appeared to be an ordinary existence. He worked as a mechanic and later as a maintenance worker for the New Mexico Park Department, earning a reputation as a hardworking employee. To neighbors, coworkers, and casual acquaintances, David Parker Ray seemed unremarkable, a quiet man living a normal life. After leaving the Army and building a career as a mechanic, Ray settled into civilian life in New Mexico. Over the years, he married 4 different women, though each marriage ultimately ended in divorce. Unlike many infamous criminals whose personal lives become heavily documented, surprisingly little information has ever been released about Ray's wives. Most remained out of the public spotlight, both before and after his arrest, leaving large portions of his family history unknown. What is known is that Ray became the father of 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. For a time, he appeared to be a working father trying to support a family. Friends, coworkers, and neighbors later described him as mechanically gifted and largely unremarkable, a man who held steady employment and blended into his community. Few suspected that he was living a secret life behind closed doors. The child who would eventually become most closely associated with the case was his daughter, Glenda Jean, aka Jessie Ray. Years before her father's arrest, Jessie reportedly contacted authorities and attempted to warn them about his activities. For reasons that remain debated, the information she provided did not lead to a criminal investigation. Yet, in one of the strangest and most troubling twists of the entire case, Jessie would later become involved in crimes connected to her father and eventually face charges herself. Little is publicly known about Ray's other daughter or his son. Following his arrest, they largely disappeared from public view. The most reputable sources have respected their privacy. As a result, many details about the Ray family remain a mystery, even today. At some point during his adult life, Ray settled in the Truth or Consequences, an Elephant Butte area of southern New Mexico, where he worked as a maintenance man for the New Mexico Parks Department. Exactly when he arrived remains unclear. But by the 1980s, he had become a familiar figure in the community. By the time David Parker Ray met Cindy Hendy, he was in his 50s and Cindy was only approximately 37 years old. Cindy had come to New Mexico after encountering legal troubles in Washington state. She eventually found work within the local state park system where her path crossed with Ray's. The two quickly formed a relationship. According to investigators, they bonded over shared violent fantasies and interests that would later play a significant role in the crimes uncovered by Ray's arrest. To coworkers and neighbors, they appeared to just be another couple living in the small New Mexico community. Behind closed doors, however, the relationship would evolve into one of the most disturbing criminal partnerships in modern true crime history. Among all of the evidence recorded from David Parker Ray's property, a few items have been as infamous as the audio recording he allegedly played for his captives. Investigators discovered a pre-recorded tape, often referred to as the toy box tape, that Ray reportedly used to address victims after they regained consciousness. Rather than speaking to them directly, he had created a detailed recording designed to explain their situation, establish his control, and break down any hope of resistance before their ordeal even began. Now, I listened to the entire tape, and let me tell you, it is lengthy. It was about 50 minutes long, so it's definitely not quick, and it is very, very disturbing. I am going to play you parts of the clip throughout this episode, but if you're squeamish or things like that really get to you, I suggest not listening to the entire tape. You can find the entire thing on YouTube, or there's also the transcripts if you don't want to listen and you want to read it. What made the recording so chilling wasn't simply its content, it was the fact that it existed at all. The tape revealed a level of preparation and premeditation rarely seen in criminal investigations. Ray had taken the time to script and record a lengthy message that treated the kidnapping and abuse of another human almost like a routine procedure. The recording was calm, methodical, and rehearsed, suggesting that this was not an impulsive act, but something he had carefully planned and potentially repeated over many years. According to investigators, the tape outlined rules for captives, describing what Ray expected from them, and attempted to convince them that resistance was pointless. It was a psychological weapon intended to create fear, confusion, and helplessness before any face-to-face interaction even occurred. For many people who have studied the case, the existence of the recording is one of the clearest windows into Ray's mindset. It demonstrated not only a desire to control his victims physically, but also an obsession with dominating them psychologically. The tape transformed what might otherwise have been viewed as isolated acts of violence into something far more disturbing, a system that appeared carefully organized practice and designed to maximize fear.
Hello there, bitch. Are you comfortable right now? I doubt it. Wrists and ankles chained, gagged, probably blindfolded. You are disoriented and scared too, I would imagine. Perfectly normal under the circumstances. For a little while, at least, you need to get your shit together and listen to this tape. It is very relevant to your situation. I'm going to tell you, in detail, why you have been kidnapped, what's going to happen to you, and how long you'll be here. I don't know the details of your capture because this tape is being created July 23rd, 1993, as a general advisory tape for future female captives. The information I'm going to give you is based on my experience dealing with captives over a period of several years. If, at a future date, there are any major changes in our procedures, the tape will be upgraded. Now, you are obviously here against your will. Totally helpless. Don't know where you're at. Don't know what's going to happen to you. You're very scared or very pissed off. I'm sure that you've already tried to get your wrists and ankles loose. No, you can't. Now you're just waiting to see what's going to happen next.
Years before David Parker Ray was finally arrested, another woman had already tried to warn authorities. That woman was Angelica Montano. According to court testimony and investigative records, Montano's ordeal began when Cindy Hendy invited her to raise property under what appeared to be an innocent pretense. Cindy reportedly told her to come by the house to pick up a cake mix. Instead, Montano found herself trapped in a nightmare. Montano later told investigators that she was held captive by Ray and Cindy, where she was subjected to prolonged abuse and torture. Like other victims who would later come forward, she described being manipulated, terrorized, and controlled by the pair. Unlike some of Ray's other known victims, however, Montano survived. At some point during her captivity, she managed to convince Ray and Cindy to let her go. She was eventually released along a highway and left to fend for herself. What happened next is one of the most frustrating aspects of this entire case. After her release, Montano was picked up by an off-duty law enforcement officer. She told him what happened, that she had been kidnapped and abused. According to later accounts, the officer did not believe her story. Rather than launching an investigation, he left her at a bus stop. Montano didn't give up. She later contacted police and again reported what had happened to her. But once again, no meaningful follow-up occurred. Her allegations went nowhere. For years, her story remained unheard. It wasn't until March 1999 when Cynthia Vigil escaped from Ray's property while still wearing chains and a metal collar that authorities finally raided the property and uncovered the evidence hidden there. Only then did investigators realize that another survivor had been trying to tell them the truth years earlier. When Montano's account was compared to the evidence recovered from Ray's trailer and to the statements of other victims, investigators found striking similarities. Her story became one of the key pieces of evidence showing that Ray's crimes had been occurring long before his arrest. In hindsight, Angelica Montano's report stands as one of the most tragic missed opportunities in the case. Had her allegations been fully investigated when she first came forward, it is possible that David Parker Ray's crimes could have been exposed years earlier, potentially sparing future victims from the horror that awaited them.
If it has not already been done, very shortly, a steel collar is going to be padlocked around your neck. It has a long, heavy chain that is padlocked to a ring in the floor. The collar will never be removed until you are turned loose. It's a permanent fixture. The hidden playroom, where you're going to be kept, has steel walls, floor and ceiling. It is virtually soundproof and has a steel door with 2 keyed locks. The hinges are welded on, and there are 2 heavy deadbolts on the outside. The room is totally escape-proof, even with tools. Any time that you are left unattended in the room, your wrists will be chained, and there are electronic sensors to let us know if you move around too much. And if that's not enough, there is a closed-circuit TV system with a surveillance camera. It's wired to the main TV in the living room, so we can check you once in a while, or just sit and watch you for the fun of it. Electronics is a wonderful thing. Expensive, but hell, everything in that room is expensive and damn well worth it.
By March 1999, David Parker Ray had allegedly been abducting and torturing women for years, but everything would change because of one woman who refused to give up. That woman was 22-year-old Cynthia Vigil. Cynthia was working as a sex worker in Albuquerque when David Parker Ray approached her. Ray was posing as an undercover police officer. He told her she was under arrest for solicitation, handcuffed her, and placed her into his vehicle. Cynthia initially believed she was being arrested by a real police officer. While being transported roughly 150 miles to Elephant Butte, Cynthia was restrained in the back of Ray's RV or trailer. At one point, she managed to partially free herself by loosening the cabinet she was attached to. She waited for an opportunity and attempted to escape while the vehicle was moving. According to Cynthia, she had gotten loose enough that she thought she could make it out. However, Ray realized what was happening, slammed on the brakes, and stopped the vehicle. Cindy then came into the back armed with a gun, ending the escape attempt. For the next 3 days, Cynthia endured horrific abuse. Throughout her captivity, she searched for an opportunity to escape, knowing that every passing hour could be the difference between life and death. What Ray and Cindy didn't realize was that Cynthia had already survived immense tragedy in her life. She later explained that she had previously lost both her mother and her best friend to murder, experiences that strengthened her determination to survive no matter what. On the morning of March 22, 1999, that opportunity finally arrived. Ray had left for work, leaving Cynthia home with Cindy. At some point, Cindy became distracted while talking on the phone. Cynthia noticed a set of keys nearby and realized they could unlock the chains restraining her. Carefully, she reached for the keys and began to free herself. Before she could fully escape, Cindy noticed what was happening. A violent struggle erupted between the two women. During the fight, Cindy struck Cynthia with a lamp, but Cynthia continued fighting. According to court records, she meant to grab an ice pick and stab Hendy in the neck. The injury wasn't fatal, but it created the opportunity that Cynthia needed. She broke free and ran. Cynthia sprinted down the road wearing little more than a padlocked metal collar and a chain around her neck. Terrified that Ray could return at any moment, she ran to the nearby residence and desperately begged for help. The homeowner brought her inside and called 911. When police arrived, Cynthia told them that she had been kidnapped and held captive inside a trailer on Ray's property. This time, authorities listened. Police immediately responded to the location, arrested David Parker Ray and Cindy Hendy, and began searching the property. What they discovered shocked even experienced investigators. Hidden on the property was the soundproof trailer filled with restraints, surveillance equipment, recordings, diagrams, and numerous items consistent with prolonged captivity and torture. The evidence would become the foundation of one of the most infamous criminal investigations in American history. In many ways, Cynthia's escape did more than just save her own life. It exposed a nightmare that authorities had no idea existed. Her courage led investigators to evidence that would identify additional survivors, including Angelica Montano and Kelly Garrett, and ultimately brought David Parker Ray's decade-long reign of terror to an end. On July 24, 1996, Kelly Garrett got into an argument with her husband and decided to spend the evening out with friends in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. During the night, she encountered Glenda Jean, aka Jessie Ray, David Parker Ray's daughter, who knew her socially. According to Garrett's later testimony, Jessie took her to the Blue Water Saloon where Garrett drank beer and socialized. At some point, Garrett's memories became hazy. Investigators would later suspect that she had been drugged, though Garrett herself had little recollection of exactly when or how it happened. What happened next would remain a mystery to her for years. Garrett later testified that she woke up restrained inside David Parker Ray's trailer near Elephant Butte. She described being held captive for approximately 2 days. During that time, she was subjected to abuse and torture at the hands of Ray and his accomplices. Much of what occurred was only partially remembered as she drifted in and out of consciousness and struggled to piece together events afterward. After the ordeal ended, Ray drove Garrett home. When they arrived, Ray reportedly told her husband that he had found her wandering incoherently near a beach area and was simply helping her get home. Garrett was confused, traumatized, and unable to fully explain where she had been. Her husband found her story difficult to believe. The disappearance created serious strain on their marriage and eventually contributing to divorce proceedings. For years, Garrett tried to move on with her life. She relocated to Colorado and largely buried the experience. She knew something terrible had happened, but she lacked clear memories and had no evidence to prove it. Without answers, the incident became something she struggled to understand, even herself. But everything changed in 1999. After Cynthia escaped from Ray's property and authorities raided the infamous trailer, investigators recovered videotapes documenting assaults. On one of those tapes, police noticed a distinctive tattoo on a victim's ankle. Using that tattoo, they identified the woman as Kelly Garrett and tracked her down in Colorado. When investigators contacted her and showed her evidence, many of the fragmented memories she had tried to suppress suddenly made sense. Garrett later testified against David Parker Ray. Her case became especially important because prosecutors had video evidence that appeared to corroborate her account. However, her testimony also revealed one of the greatest challenges investigators faced. Victims who had been drugged often struggled to remember events clearly, making them vulnerable to attacks on their credibility in court. In a troubling development, Ray's first trial involving Garrett's case ended in a mistrial after jurors expressed doubts about parts of her testimony. Prosecutors retried the case, and Ray was ultimately convicted on all 12 counts related to Garrett's abduction and abuse. Years later, Garrett spoke publicly about seeing Ray's face on the television after his arrest. She described a flood of realization as she understood that the terrifying fragments she had carried for years were real. What she had once questioned and struggled to explain was finally confirmed by the evidence investigators found inside the trailer.
If I killed every bitch that we kidnapped, there'd be bodies strung all over the country. And besides, I don't like killing a girl unless it is absolutely necessary. So, I've devised a safe, alternate method of disposal. I had plenty of bitches to practice on over the years, so I've pretty well got it down pat. And I enjoy doing it. I get off on mind games. After we get completely through with you, you're going to be drugged up real heavy with a combination of sodium pentothal and phenobarbital. They are both hypnotic drugs that will make you extremely susceptible to hypnosis, auto-hypnosis, and hypnotic suggestion. You're going to be kept drugged a couple days while I play with your mind. By the time I get through brainwashing you, you're not going to remember a fucking thing about this little adventure. You won't remember this place, us, or what has happened to you. There won't be any DNA evidence because you'll be bathed and both holes between your legs will be thoroughly flushed out. You'll be dressed, sedated, and turned loose on some country road, bruised, Sore all over, but nothing that won't heal up in a week or two. The thought of being brainwashed may not be appealing to you, but we've been doing it a long time, and it works. And it's the lesser of two evils. I'm sure that you would prefer that in lieu of being strangled or having your throat cut. Okay, undoubtedly, somebody's going to be looking for you. There may or may not be a missing persons report. But nobody's going to be looking for you here. They don't have any idea where you're at. You don't even know where you're at. We're always very careful about that. There are not going to be any knights in shining armor coming to rescue you. You are strictly on your own, and under the circumstances, I bet that is a scary thought.
For every victim who was identified, there appeared to be others who remained unknown. Investigators found evidence suggesting that additional women had been photographed or recorded, yet many of those faces could not be matched to known victims. Some may have survived and never came forward. Others may have had little or no memory of their ordeal, and some investigators feared that certain victims might never be identified at all. The uncertainty surrounding those unidentified women became one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Authorities spent years attempting to determine who they were and where they were if they were still alive. The FBI eventually released photographs of personal belongings recovered from Ray's property, hoping that family members or friends might recognize an item and provide a crucial lead. Despite the extensive investigation, many questions remain unanswered. While several survivors were identified and tested against Ray and his accomplices, the total number of women who passed through the trailer may never be known. The evidence suggests a pattern of crime spanning years, but the full scope of those crimes died with many of the answers investigators were seeking. To this day, some of the women seen in the evidence recovered from the property have never been publicly identified, leaving investigators and victim advocates wondering how many stories remain untold. Had Cynthia not escaped, then it probably never would have come to light. As investigators worked through the evidence, a small network of accomplices began to emerge. The most prominent accomplice was Cindy Hendy. Cindy had met Ray in the 1990s and became romantically involved with him. According to survivors and prosecutors, she actively participated in the kidnappings and abuse. Cynthia Vigil identified Hendy as the woman who guarded her captivity while Ray was away. After her arrest, Hendy eventually agreed to testify against Ray and was sentenced to 36 years in prison for her role in the crimes. She served nearly 2 decades before being released in 2019. Her release shocked many observers, particularly survivors and advocates who felt the punishment did not reflect the suffering endured by Ray's victims. Cynthia Vigil, whose escape ultimately brought down Ray's operation, had publicly maintained that Cindy was not merely following orders, but was an active participant in the abuse she endured. Following her release, Cindy largely disappeared from public view. In 2022, reports resurfaced that she was living in Hamilton, Montana, prompting concern among local residents who learned of her connection to one of America's most infamous criminal cases. More recently, reports have placed Hendy in Kent, Washington, where she has reportedly lived since her release from prison. According to public records, she remains listed on the state's sex offender registry. Unlike some former offenders who have given interviews or spoken publicly about their crimes, Cindy has remained largely silent. She has not publicly explained the role in that case, explained remorse in any widely reported interview, or offered insight into how she became involved with David Parker Ray. As a result, many questions about Cindy Hendy remain unanswered. For survivors and investigators alike, she represents one of the last living links to a case that continues to raise questions decades after David Parker Ray's death. While Ray took many secrets to his grave, some believe Cindy may still hold answers about unidentified victims and crimes that have never been fully explained. Investigators also turned their attention to Ray's daughter, Glenda Jean Ray, who was commonly known as Jessie Ray. Authorities alleged that Jessie had helped lure at least one victim into her father's orbit. She was charged with kidnapping and criminal sexual penetration. Rather than going to trial, Jessie entered a no contest plea and received a sentence of approximately 2.5 years in prison, followed by probation. Her involvement remains one of the most disturbing aspects of this case because she was not merely aware of her father's activities. Prosecutors believe she actively participated in at least some of them. Another man linked to the case was Dennis Roy Yancey, Jessie Ray's former boyfriend. In 1999, Yancey confessed to the murder of 22-year-old Marie Parker. According to his confession, Jesse helped lure Parker to David Parker Ray's property where she was held captive. Yancey claimed that Ray later forced him into strangling Parker to death at gunpoint. However, investigators were unable to find forensic evidence linking Ray directly to Parker's murder, and Ray was never charged in connection with her death. Yancey was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison. As the investigation expanded, authorities began to suspect that the circle of people involved may have been larger than those eventually charged. Survivors described multiple participants, and evidence suggested that various girlfriends and associates may have known about or taken part in some of Ray's activities. However, investigators were unable to gather enough evidence to bring charges against anyone beyond the core group of Ray, Cindy, Jessie Ray, and Dennis. Ultimately, David Parker Ray pled guilty to numerous charges related to kidnapping and torture and received a sentence totaling 224 years in prison. Yet, despite the horrifying allegations surrounding the case and suspicions that many more victims existed, Ray was never convicted of murder. In 2002, before investigators could question him further about possible unidentified victims and suspected homicides, he died of a heart attack in prison, taking many of the answers with him.
Well, I believe I've told you about everything that I can. I cannot predict the future. I can't predict changes of procedure. But if this tape is being played for you, I have to assume that it is still reasonably accurate. And I can only give you advice. Be smart and be a survivor. Don't ever scream. Don't talk without permission. Be very quiet. Be docile and obedient. And, by all means, show proper respect. Have a nice day.
Unlike many notorious serial killers, Ray was never convicted of the murders. No bodies were ever conclusively linked to him, and many of the allegations surrounding the case remain impossible to fully prove. Yet investigators uncovered a soundproof trailer filled with evidence of kidnapping, torture, and abuse. Survivors came forward with remarkably similar accounts. Videotapes documented crimes that had remained hidden for years, and testimony of victims painted a picture of a man who had spent decades turning violent fantasies into reality. But for every question that was answered, new ones emerged. How many victims were there truly? Were all of them identified? Did some survive without even realizing what happened to them? And perhaps the most haunting of all, were there victims who never made it out alive? Those questions may never be answered. When David Parker Ray died of a heart attack in prison on May 28, 2002, he took many of those answers with him. His daughter, Jessie, disappeared from public view after serving her sentence. Cindy Hendy was eventually released from prison and has remained largely silent. The people who likely knew the most about the full scope of the crime had never publicly revealed everything they knew. Yet amidst all the uncertainty, there is one thing that is undeniable. The case would have never come to light without the courage of the women who survived. Cynthia Vigil's escape exposed the trailer and evidence hidden within it. Kelly Garrett's testimony helped establish a pattern of abuse stretching back years. Angelica Montano's account revealed that warnings had existed long before Ray's arrest. Together, their stories transformed what could have remained a hidden nightmare into a criminal case that investigators could no longer ignore. Today, the toy box itself is gone, David Parker Ray is dead, but the questions surrounding the case continue to linger. For investigators, survivors, and the families of missing women across the Southwest, the mystery is not whether terrible crimes occurred, it is whether the full truth will ever be known. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of all. Not what investigators discovered inside the trailer, but what they may never discover. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed this meal. It was my first time making the green chili corn fritters, and I just forget how great fritters are in general because there's so many different flavors that you can make with them. But these were especially good. Of course, you can't go wrong with a good brisket. And then the bread pudding was really good. I've never had a chocolate one before, so everything was delicious. And I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.